to identify and name prisms and pyramids. We're also going to be identifying the parts of a three-dimensional shape. So we actually have two aims today: to identify and name prisms and pyramids, and also to identify the parts of a three-dimensional shape. So we have two aims for today. We're going to be using these shapes that were given to you. We're actually also going to learn how to draw the shapes. I'm not going to teach you awesome ways to draw the shapes. They're just going to be quick sketch shapes, but shapes nonetheless. Okay? So the first shape that we're going to look at is the triangular prism. Go ahead and, if you've got all the shapes made on your desk, between you and your partner, one of you pick up the shape that you believe to be a triangular prism and hold it up in the air. Okay. If you are holding up the shape that looks like this, then you are holding up a triangular prism. I'm going to quickly show you a way to quickly draw a triangular prism. Make sure that you are listening and practicing all on your own. So one of the key features of this triangular prism are the two triangles that are opposite each other. Are the two triangles that are opposite of each other. So if I want to draw this, I actually start by drawing those two triangles. We actually call them bases. When we're talking about bases, we're talking about two shapes that are exactly the same, opposite of each other, or a shape that has a vertice exactly opposite. So if I want to draw this triangular prism, I'm going to start by drawing these two triangular bases. And then I'm going to connect the points. I'm going to connect top with top, right side with right side, and left side with left side. What you can see there is, it's not a great picture, but a picture nonetheless of a triangular prism. The reason why I think this is such an excellent skill is because it's going to help you be able to count and identify some of the different parts of a triangular prism, even if you don't have a triangular prism directly in front of you. So let's start with some review information. Let's talk about vertices. Does anybody remember what a vertex or a vertice is? Andrea? It's the point where the lines meet. Excellent. So when we're talking about vertices, on our picture here, it's these points where things meet. And one way that people like to remember this, thinking about this V and this vertice comes to a point. That's kind of a reminder that a vertex are these points here on the edge. So, how many vertices, that's plural of vertex, does this triangular prism have? Show me with your fingers. How many vertices does this triangular prism have? Feel free to use my drawing or your drawing or the shape in front of you to determine it. Okay, obviously I've already put the points on there in red, and if I count them on the shape that's in front of me, it's 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point, 5 point, and 6 points. So there are 6 vertices here. Edges. Who remembers what edges are when we're talking about three-dimensional shapes? Who can describe to me or show me what an edge is? Ricardo?
An edge is like that.
Why don't you show me on one of the figures in front of your face? That's a vertex. We just talked about those. Oscar? Yeah, so he's talking about kind of these lines or these edges that run along where two faces meet. So our technical definition for an edge is where two faces meet. Okay? So the way we can look at those in our drawing is, in our drawing, that's every line that we had to draw to make that shape. So I had to draw 1 line for this triangle, 2 lines, 3 lines for that triangle, 4, 5, 6 for that second triangle, and then connect them 7, 8, and 9. So how many edges does a triangular prism have? 9. All right. Faces. Let's go back to faces. I kind of hinted at faces already. What are faces? Mr. Ross. Okay. Can somebody describe it in words? He's definitely showing me a very good example. Somebody describe it in words. Kevin. Yeah, the flat surfaces of a shape. So when we're talking about this particular object that I have in front of me, basically we're talking about all of the different places I can set it down on. So any flat surface. So when I'm counting it, I'm counting and I'm looking 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are faces. So there are 5 faces. Now the last thing that we have to talk about are bases. Bases are just special faces. Okay, so they're flat surfaces as well. They're just special. What's special about them is that they have the exact same shape directly across from them, or a vertex directly across from them. So when I'm looking at this particular shape here, I see that there are 2 triangles directly across from each other, which means those 2 triangles are both bases, which means I have 2 bases. And what are the shapes of the bases in this one? I just said it. Everybody? Triangles. All right. Mr. Posey.
For faces, can't you just say all 2D shapes?
That's one way to think about it, yes. All right, let's move on. Between you and your partner, you should be able to now pick up the rectangular prism. Please go ahead and pick up and hold up in the air the shape you believe to be a rectangular prism. Excellent. I see that all of you are holding up a shape that looks like this. Go ahead and put it back down on the table. Let's start by talking about the number of faces in this rectangular prism. So right now I'm kind of... Excellent. I see that most of you are showing me the number 6. And thinking about this, how many bases does this shape have? Show me with your fingers how many bases you think this has. Yeah, I see lots of different answers here. I see some people showing me 2 and some people showing me 6. Because what you see, I feel like a lot of you are seeing is that this rectangle has a rectangle directly opposite of it. This rectangle has a rectangle directly opposite of it. This rectangle has another rectangle exactly opposite of it. So all of these really could be bases. When we're talking about these particular shapes, we're going to say that they have a maximum of 2 bases. Okay, so this has 2 bases, and the shapes of those bases are rectangles.
What if we have 1?
All right. Now we're going to talk about how to quickly draw this shape. We're going to draw this shape just like we drew the triangular prism. I'm going to draw my 2 bases, which can be rectangles of any shape that I want. And I'm just going to set them off from each other just a little bit. And I'm going to try and draw 2 rectangles that look exactly the same. Once I've got my 2 rectangles, just like I did with the triangular prism, I'm going to connect the corners. So top right to top right, top left to top left, bottom left to bottom left, and back right to back right. And now we have a rectangular prism. The reason that this rectangular prism is so great is if we need to identify vertices and edges, we can quickly now just come over on our shape, even if they don't give one to us, and we can start counting vertices. Well, I see my vertices here, corner 1, corner 2, corner 3, corner 4, corner 5, corner 6, corner 7, corner 8. I have 8 total vertices. If I'm coming through and I'm trying to find the number of edges, Okay, when I want to go through and find the edges, I think about those lines that I had to draw. So I can see that for this rectangle, for the two bases, I drew 1, 2, 3, and 4. For the other base, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And to connect them, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So this shape has 12 edges. All right? So that's our rectangular prism. All right, let's slide on over and look at the other two shapes that we have today. We have a triangular pyramid. Please do me a favor, pick up the shape that you believe is a triangular pyramid. Right now, you should be picking up the shape that you believe to be a triangular pyramid.
No, we're correct. Too much.
Okay. So let's look at these. I see a lot of people holding up these two particular shapes. They look like this. What's the difference between these two shapes?
Oh.
What is the difference between these two shapes? Sadie? One has a rectangle for its base or its bottom, and one has a triangle for its base and its bottom. So the one that is a triangular pyramid is the one that has a triangle for its base. So let's talk about how we can draw these particular shapes. When we're talking about pyramids, pyramids always have one base. So if I want to draw a triangular pyramid, just like we did with the prisms, I'm going to start by drawing the base. So I have a triangular base. Now, what is opposite of that one base? So in this case, in our prisms, there was another base opposite our base. But in this case, what's opposite of our base? Mr. Posey?
3 faces. Oh,
It's not opposite of.
The edge, the top of the pyramid where it's very pointy.
Yeah, the very pointy thing, and that pointy thing is called a
Vertical.
vertex.
Vertex.
All right, so if we want to draw our pyramid, I'm going to draw my vertex so it can be opposite my base. And then I'm just going to connect my vertex down to one corner, down to the other corner, now down to the third corner. And you can kind of see, you have to look really carefully and look at your shape just right to recognize this as a triangular pyramid. How many bases does this triangular pyramid have? Show me with your fingers, how many bases does this triangular pyramid have? Remember, it's a maximum of 2. We have one base that has a vertex opposite of it. Once you choose one base, it's either going to have another base opposite of it or none at all. So it's either one base or 2. What is the shape of the base? Triangle.
What type of triangle do we have to be?
Doesn't matter. How many faces does it have? So we're now counting the number of those flat surfaces. Show me with your fingers, how many flat surfaces does it have? Feel free to pick up the one in front of you and count. Show me with your fingers, how many faces does this shape have? Count again. 1 on the bottom, 2, 3, and 4 coming around. There are only 4 faces on this shape. How many vertices does this shape have? So now we're looking back at those points. I can use the figure that I've already drawn to come back through and label them. I had my 1 vertex, 2, 3, and 4 vertices. Thinking about my number of edges. My edges are again those figures, those lines that I drew to make it. So I drew my base, and that was 1, 2, 3. And then connected, I went 4, 5, and 6. All right, so there are 6 edges. So that is a triangular pyramid. Last one. The only shape that we have left is our rectangular pyramid. How many bases does this rectangular pyramid have?
1.
1 base. What is the shape of that base? It is a rectangle. How many faces does this rectangular pyramid have? Should be counting 1 on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4 around. So that's a total of 5 faces. So before we do the vertices and the edges, let's talk really quickly about drawing this particular shape. Always start with the base. Say it's a rectangle of any shape that you want. Then we have its vertex directly on top. And then we just connect the vertex to the different points. So if you look at that, looks like you've got a pyramid there. All right, and that should help you count the number of vertices. So as I come back through and label them, I see 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, and 5 points. 5 vertices, and the edges were those lines that I drew. So I drew the base. That was 1, 2, 3, and 4. 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 edges. Okay? I want you to silently look at these 2 different sets of shapes. You'll see underneath the prisms, you have 2 questions. Underneath the pyramids, you have 2 questions. I want you to silently, by yourself, without your partner's help, go ahead and answer those 2 questions. What is the same about all prisms? Oscar? They all have what? 2 bases. And how is each prism named? Okay, how is each prism named? So I'd like to think about it as first name, last name. The last name is prism. How do we name the first name? What's the first name of each of these prisms? Mr. Posey?
The base.
The shape of the base. So when we see that it has 2 bases, that tells us it's in the prism family. So its last name is prism. And its first name is the shape of its base. So if those 2 bases are triangles, then its first name is triangular. If its bases are rectangles, then its first name is rectangular. Pentagons? Pentagonal. Hexagons? Hexagonal.
Octagon.
Octagons? Octagonal.
What about the 10 shape? I mean, the 7.
7-sided would be septagonal. All right?
What about 10-sided?
Let's move on over to our other side. What is common about all pyramids? What is common about all pyramids? Damien. What is common about 1 base? Yikes. 1 base. So that tells us the last name. If we see that it has 1 base, its last name is pyramid. And how do we get its first name? Mr. Matlock. Andrea. Okay. All right, the shape of their base. And what was the other thing that you had to add? What's that? Awesome. And so she's recognizing another common thing about pyramids is that they always have triangles that meet to that vertex. And we could also say the same thing about the prisms, is they all have rectangles that go from base to base. Those are definitely 2 other ways to think about identifying prisms and pyramids. All right, now we've got 2 other shapes over here that we're going to talk about. The first is a cylinder. A cylinder is like a can. I've got 2 circles, and I can connect them. Like a can of soda, a can of soup, can of tuna, whatever. And we see that this shape has how many bases? 2. And the shapes of those bases are circles. All right, this is a tricky one. Don't get caught here. Somebody with a raised hand, how many faces does a cylinder have? Joseph? Just 2. Because remember that when we're talking about faces, we're talking about flat surfaces. So we're talking about the sides of the cylinder are not flat faces. How many vertices does it have?
4.
How many vertices does it have? Yang? Yeah, it was a trick question. 0. There's no places where we come to points. And finally, when we're talking about edges, remember our technical definition for edges is where faces meet. And if we only have 2 faces and those 2 faces don't run into each other, then how many edges does this shape have? 0. Technically, it has 0. Now, you'll find some people, and there is some debate within the mathematical community about whether you consider the top to be an edge or not. So you could say 0 and you could say 2, and both would be okay arguments.
Which one do you prefer?
I prefer 0. All right. How does a cylinder kind of fit into the prism category? Elmer? 2 bases. Now, what separates it and the reason why it doesn't have a prism name is that it doesn't have rectangles connecting those bases. Okay? That's why it has its own name. It's because there's not rectangles connecting those bases.
If you unwrap
Later. All right, cones. So cones, we can draw the base. And much like when we draw our pyramids, we'll take our vertex that's directly opposite that, and we'll draw it down. So here we have a cone.
how many bases do it?
Yeah.
0.
How many bases? 1 base. Shape of that base is a circle. How many faces does it have? Just the one, just that one specialized base. How many vertices does it have?
1.
Exactly 1. And how many edges does it have? 0.
Oh, wait, 2? No.
So this is where, remember that cylinders are going to be a little bit different. It's where the faces meet. Well, if there's only 1 face, it can't meet with any other faces. So I'm going to say 0. Again, within the mathematical community, there are some who would argue that there is 1 edge at the bottom of the circle. I prefer 0. How does the cone kind of fit the pyramid?
1 base.
All right, it has 1 base. So let's look over here at this last question. This is kind of one of our key points for today. What is the difference between prisms and pyramids? How can we distinguish the difference between prisms and pyramids? What one identifying feature can we use to determine whether a shape is a prism or a pyramid? Renee.
A prism has 2 bases and a pyramid has 1.
Good. Excellent synthesis. A prism has 2 bases. And a pyramid has 1 base. So this is definitely one of our key points today. I'm going to put a star next to it. And I'm going to scroll back up to where my key points are. I'm going to put a star there. And the second key point today is the answer to how we get those first names of those prisms is by looking at the shape of the base. So I'm going to put a box with a triangle inside of it. And we're going to come over here. We're going to add just a little bit to that key point. So we're going to make sure that we know how to name those particular shapes. So we're going to make a list here based on the number of sides that a shape has. And we're just going to do the ones that I expect you to know, which is 3 through 7. So a shape with 3 sides is called a
Triangle.
triangle. So we would call it a triangular prism or pyramid.
Cube.
4-sided shape is actually called a quadrilateral, but we're going to see all these shapes. We're going to call them rectangular. A 5-sided shape is called a pentagon, so it would be pentagonal. Pentagonal. A hexagon would be a 6-sided shape, so this would be hexagonal. A 7-sided shape is called a septagon, so it is going to be septagonal. And finally, 8-sided shape would be an octagon, so it would be called octagonal. Okay.